Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this webinar, which is hosted by Beale Company alongside Arup Associates to take stock on the legal and practical implications of BIM. First, some brief introductions. My name is Andrew Croft. I'm a solicitor here at Beale Company in the projects and construction team, and I was involved in drafting the CIC protocol over 2 years ago now. I've also discussed the legal implications of BIM with those across the construction industry over the last couple of years. I'm pleased to be joined today by Casey Rutland, an architect and associate director at Arup Associates. Casey specialises in BIM project design, delivery and management, and is Arup's global architectural BIM leader. For the first time in Beale Company webinars, we are using Twitter today to enable attendees to communicate with us during the course of the webinar. So if you have any questions or discussions that you'd like to have during today's webinar or after it, if you're listening to a recording, please get in touch with us via Twitter using the hashtag BIMinar, or use those contact details on the slide. So the main reason we wanted to host this webinar today is because there has been a significant amount of progress in the UK construction industry over the last few years in relation to the adoption and use of BIM. This has perhaps been driven by the UK government mandate to use BIM on all public sector projects by 2016. However, because the progress has been fairly rapid and at different paces across the industry, we thought it was important just to use today to take stock on where we are both practically and legally in relation to BIM. So, just by way of a summary, Casey is going to start by considering the practical considerations in relation to BIM, i.e. what BIM actually means and how it impacts on the design progress, as well as current best practice. I'm then going to consider some common legal questions in relation to BIM and some common concerns, as well as how BIM is being reflected contractually at the moment. So I'm now going to pass over to Casey, who's going to start his section of the talk.
Right, good afternoon everybody, thank you for joining us. As Andrew has said, my name is Casey Rutland, I'm an architect and associate director at Arup Associates, and I'm going to talk to you today about quite a lot of information in a very short space of time, with around about 60 slides to get through in 20 minutes, so we'll see how that works out on a webinar, just in terms of rapid slide progress. So we shall crack on. Andrew asked me to give a little bit of information about what BIM is and how it affects the design process, and then have a look at what best practice looks like from both an organisational level and a project level. So in a nutshell, what we're trying to do with implementing BIM as a process is digitise the construction industry, and what we mean by that is not necessarily just using a computer. We need to use computers sensibly with structured data, enabling us to exchange information between parties, between disciplines, between companies, between global regions, all sensibly, all without as little waste as we possibly can. So we're looking at access to company information, to project information, and to staff information, and making sure we can act upon this information sensibly throughout all of our company's existence in whatever it is they do. And devices and the way we operate with this data is changing, will change, and will change even quicker than it currently is. I think many of us on this webinar will have a mobile device, an iPad, a computer, a laptop, maybe even lucky enough to have an Apple Watch. But how many of these people are using the mobile devices at their maximum extent for their work? And that's what we need people to understand, is that the industry can use these devices and should use these devices to access their information securely for whatever reason, to do their work, and not treat these devices and the technology as separate, as just part of their social life, but it's very much a part of their professional lives. And on a similar note, BIM is for everyone. BIM is for everybody, every part of the industry, every scale of staff. Doesn't matter whether you're new into the job or you've been working for 40 years. This is very much about everybody and is all inclusive. Many of us will know in our experiences throughout whatever it is we do, implementing something different has its challenges, and apologies to anyone that's seen these before, but I have my top 10 list of challenges when implementing BIM, either at organisational or project levels. I'm just going to run through these very quickly. So at number 10, we have the classic BIM doesn't affect me. As we said before, BIM is for everybody. It doesn't matter who you are, whether you're a client, a contractor, a builder, a joiner, painter, a PM, QS, doesn't matter who you are or what you are. BIM does affect you and can affect you. Number 9, BIM is for nerds. Again, the perception that this is all about software and all about technology, and it's just for the geeky people. It's actually not. There's a lot of BIM is about project management, about the commercial aspects and legal aspects. And as a professional, as part of the process, I feel the need to know all of the professional sides of the aspects of BIM. At number 8, time, or more precisely, I don't have time to do BIM. A perception that BIM is all about extra learning and extra work, rather than the truth of it is actually trying to reduce the amount of waste we have and do things quicker, more accurately. Which leads to procrastination. It leads to, oh, we can't do this, we put that off because we don't have time to learn it. Best time to learn it is now. The best time to learn it really was yesterday. But if you adopt it now, you research, you understand what it is you're doing right now, it's a lot better. You end up gaining the benefits very, very quickly. Number 7, BIM costs too much. This is regularly thrown out to us by all sizes of companies, really. And addressing this simply at an architectural level, just purely through the adoption of software. This should demonstrate some of the benefits. Traditionally, we design or we have a group of people, a team of people operating different pieces of software in a traditional 2D manner, one producing plans, one following around producing elevation sections, and another one doing schedules and 3D models. And these are never coordinated at any one point. One person is always chasing around another person. Things will always change. And they're all aiming to produce a single coordinated set of documentation to show what the building is doing. Conversely, simply at the level of purchasing some technology and software, that same team could use 3 pieces of software but produce 3 projects, depending on what the scale of the projects were, all sorts of other factors to consider. But basically, those people, any one person driving a BIM authoring tool can produce plan sections, elevations, schedules, and a 3D model all in one sitting. They're not chasing one another around. Moving a door means it moves everywhere, which means changing the data in it, which means the door schedules update. It's just a simple fact. Once those people are up to a competent level, you'll quickly outstrip your previous working methods in terms of productivity and accuracy. Number 6, asking for something you don't understand. This is not necessarily aimed at anyone in particular, but probably rather more appropriate to clients and contractors, saying, we want some BIM, do some BIM. Please do some BIM for us. Asking for something you don't understand isn't necessarily going to gain you any benefits. If clients and contractors understand what it is they're asking for, or if designers understand what it is they're asking for from manufacturers for object content, then it makes it a lot clearer. It makes it a lot more understandable. Everyone has the same terms of reference. They understand what it is they're asking for and why they're asking for it. Number 5, standards. There are lots of standards and a hell of a lot of standards. The point with those standards is that you follow them, you understand them, you can deliver the basics of them and then improve upon them, but don't change them. Once you change them, they become non-standards, and that's where issues start to creep in. Number 4 is change, often missed in terms of time and cost calculations, but change does need to happen. This is not just about adopting a new piece of software, it's adopting new working processes, understanding new legal implications, new challenges in terms of resources. Projects might actually end up running quicker, so that may also present a challenge. But the change management costs are often different depending on the size of organisation, the type of organisation you are. But smaller companies can and do tend to be a lot more agile. Number 3, BIM is all about software. I think you've got the point by now that we've already discussed that BIM is pretty much about the process supported by, driven by the commercial aspects and the legal aspects and supported by technology. But you do need both. The directors and top level staff within your company do need to understand the BIM process. They do need to understand the implications. And at number 2, pink fleshy bits, people. Pink fleshy bits, as I like to call them. These are always the people that need to be valued. They need to be understanding why they're doing what they're doing. They need to understand implementing a new process may well get them home on time. It may well free them up. It may well mean they're working on different projects, on more challenging projects. It will be a personal development for those people as well as a benefit to the industry, the company, the UK government. We're not just about doing this for the UK government. That often seems a little bit unachievable to individuals. And in at number 1 is that people see all of these aspects as an obstacle to adopting a better way of working. And I think understanding that if you implement this because you want to, not because someone else is asking you to, you're likely to achieve those benefits a lot quicker. So moving on then to how BIM affects and impacts design. We've obviously got very little time here in this webinar to go through into any level of detail, so these are just broad brush statements. So in terms of design, what we're looking at is to reduce the waste, so get rid of time waste, duplication, triplication, rebuilding things, remodeling things, re-entering data. We just want to reduce that. We want to all talk in a common language, be able to transfer data from one place to another. Improved visibility scares a lot of people in terms of seeing what they're doing, seeing what they haven't done, seeing what they've missed, but improved visibility can only lead to a better outcome. We want to see what's missing, see what the issues are, see how a model is developing, if a model is developing, who's lagging, who needs a little bit more encouragement or training or whatever it happens to be. Doing this in a virtual environment is bound to be better than doing it on site. That leads to a greater confidence. Kick back and relax because you know things are coordinated, you know things are working well together, you know you have a greater confidence in what you're producing in terms of multidisciplinary designed building, so you have a better understanding of where everything goes. And that allows communication, having a greater appreciation of what it is that the building's doing, what the issues are, what the pertinent design issues are. The building might be completely clash resolved, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the design is resolved or is the best solution for what it's trying to achieve. That's something clash detection will not pick up. So communicating allows to see and visualize these ideas. And understanding, a team understanding, full, much deeper understanding of what the project is, what it's doing, how it's performing, and how it might be built, which then leads to alignment. All parties understanding what their common aims and goals are and what they're trying to achieve. Moving on to the next topic of best practice BIM. Obviously, this is not necessarily industry practiced and industry proven, but these are hints and suggestions for best practice for BIM implementation at an organisational level. Really does depend on who you are. It doesn't matter who you are. As I said, it's probably applicable to everyone. So whether you're a client, designer, contractor, PM, painter, builder, QS, manufacturer, it really doesn't matter because it will affect you all in slightly different ways, but at the same time, conversely, in the same ways. They are all generally the same issues, but they're resolved in slightly different ways. And I've categorized these into 4 different ways. So the change management, as we've already discussed, smaller companies, SMEs, they can be more agile. They can say, right, okay, these new suite of documents have come out, we've read them, we've understood them, it's taken us a week, but on Monday we're implementing them. If I'm trying to do that on behalf of Arup, as 13,500 staff around the world, it's a bigger challenge. It will take longer. It will take longer to assume that people have read and understood the documents. It will take even longer to implement them. But it is done. It does happen. And once you've got that, it will lead to consistency. And we can again compare this to a larger organization, compare a larger and smaller organization. Consistency with a practice of 5 people is actually very easy to achieve. Everyone is looking and seeing and has visibility of each other's work. They can see what they're supposed to achieve. If you have companies where they have people in remote offices, it's more difficult to achieve, and you tend to only get to see people's work once it's being issued. But that's the point of standards. If everyone's working to those standards, everyone understands those standards, everything tends to work a little easier. Once we've got these standards, as I said, make sure you achieve the baseline requirements of those standards. Then over time you can improve them. You can make your own improvements. Who knows, you could end up informing the next set of standards. And the lean approach is all about reducing waste. So getting rid of waste, as we've said before, in the design process, in the construction process, wasting time, wasting money, wasting resources. All of these things we can cut out of the industry, and this is where the big savings will come that the government have identified. And the best approach, as far as we've seen, isn't necessarily the one that we've demonstrated here in this image. With companies saying this is our part of the industry, this is our box, this is what we do, and we'll carry on doing that, but we'll BIM it as well. So we'll run the two processes side by side. So that just generates waste. It will not be as effective as the better option, which is implanting BIM within your company, making it part of just the way you work, not duplicating, not double handing, not wasting time, effort, money, and resources. And all of those are now supported quite usefully by the government's pillars of BIM, currently standing at 8, but always increasing. The 8 pillars of Level 2 BIM, which cover, we're not going to go into great details, but they cover the legal sides and appointments. They cover the process. PAS 1192 guides you through the process of how you'll be sharing, what you'll be doing, and who's responsible for what. And if your particular project has any security issues with regards to access to the information, or the building physically itself is a secure facility, there are documents that can do that as well, part BS 1192 Part 5. And it's all about planning, and we'll come on to that a little bit more at the practice level, at the project level, but planning what you do is vital. And the information that we start to share, so is that structured? Is it consistent? Can we share that amongst other people? Has it been checked? And there are guides and a PAS document, a BS document that will guide you through that. Classification, allowing all of our objects that we create through the design process to be classified in a way that allows other consultants, whether they be cost consultants, project managers, contractors, all the way down through to these subcontractors or suppliers. We can classify our objects in order that they can have multiple uses all the way down the line. And then soft landings. We're no longer handing over the keys at the end of a job and saying, there you go, Mr. Owner Operator, go away and deal with the building. We're ideally, if we're lucky, having input at the start, at stage 0 or stage 1, to get input from the operator of the building to see how they might operate, what spaces they might need. And then having an extended handover period. So getting these people in to understand how the building is formed physically, where their spaces are, how specific pieces of MEP kit work, what the tolerances are, and then going back afterwards for up to 3 years and checking the performance of that building, checking it meets the requirements, how it was designed, and whether things are failing. And all of those things apply at practice and project level as well, with the addition of a few more things, making sure we have our commercial arrangements and appointments in place first. A lot of the failings, and I'm sure many people on this webinar have had examples of this or experienced examples of this, where their BIM deliverables are just not contractual. They haven't signed anything that says you will deliver models and structured data, and at which point the excuse is, or the reason is, that they have run out of time, they can't do it, and they'll deliver 2D AutoCAD plans at the end of the work stage. Now, that's where the whole process starts to fall apart. So getting something in place, using the BIM protocol with whatever modifications are needed at the time, sets things up nicely so that there's no wriggle room for people to avoid it. And here we come back to planning. Plan the time, plan your strategy, and plan how things are going to come together as a team, as a building, as an asset. We need to plan exactly what we're doing, map it out. The digital The MBS BIM Toolkit as a digital plan of work is a very useful tool. Yes, it's a different way of working, but it does create a digital checklist that we can use throughout the process, allowing us to throw a model at a certain system, which will then give it a big green tick if it complies, or an amber mark if it doesn't. And then we can start to work through this sensibly, noting whether people have achieved what they're supposed to achieve. And we do our work, we check our work, we share our work. But we do all that digitally. We need to do it digitally so that we're reducing the manual processes and effort in what we do, which creates consistency. But ultimately, and above all, we should be using the BIM standards, using all the documents that the government have commissioned and released in the past couple of years to ensure that we are all working to a consistent standard and all understanding what it is we've got to do when we've got to deliver it. So with that, I'll hand back over to Andrew.
Thank you very much, Casey. I'm now going to consider the legal considerations associated with BIM. So, one of the reasons I wanted to have this webinar is that there have been a lot of discussions recently and a lot of concerns expressed in relation to the legal implications of using BIM. In particular, there is a lot of concern that there are a lot of hidden legal issues associated with BIM, and that whilst BIM is a really good tool on a practical level, as soon as it becomes to be considered by a court of law, which obviously hopefully it won't be, but as soon as that happens, there will be a lot of hidden issues. Obviously, BIM will change what anybody is doing on a project, as Casey mentioned. So it will impact on rights and obligations and also potentially liability. But that impact and the implications of using BIM can be managed if you're clear about what BIM means on any project in which you're using it, on which it's being used, the responsibilities of the project team on that project, and how the team will collaborate. And it's important that you try and establish that at the outset to the extent you can. For example, if an employer says they would like you to provide just BIM, or perhaps even BIM level 5, whatever that means, go back to them and ask them what exactly they want you to do. Otherwise, you could end up in a situation where you thought you were doing one thing and the employer thought you were doing something completely different. And clearly that also applies to employers if members of the supply chain say that they can use BIM at a certain level. These sort of things that apply on a BIM project would probably also apply on any project. So the key thing is that BIM essentially amplifies issues which would normally have arisen. It just makes it more important that you, for example, clarify your scope and understand exactly what you're doing at the outset. So I'm now going to consider some common concerns in relation to the use of BIM from a legal perspective. One such concern is that there is no UK case law on the implications of BIM. So there is a bit of concern that BIM will involve taking on a lot more risk, or that there will be a lot of hidden issues associated with it. Whilst there is no UK case law, there has been case law in the United States. However, that essentially was on a project on which BIM was used rather than a BIM specific issue. So it didn't really provide much additional detail. Essentially, in our view, BIM should only involve the team taking on onerous obligations if they have agreed to them. An example of an additional obligation that might be associated with BIM is included on the slide, and that's taken from the CIOB Complex Project Contract, Clause 11.3.4. Essentially makes the contractor solely responsible for the suitability and integrity of software, which wouldn't necessarily be something you'd see on a non-BIM contract. Obviously, if the employer wants the contractor to take that risk and the contractor is willing to take that on, that's a commercial decision. But it's important that if you take on that sort of risk, you know that you're going to do so. And so the key thing is just to make sure you understand carefully any contractual provisions in relation to BIM and any BIM protocol, whether that be the CIC protocol or an amended version or a bespoke protocol, so you understand how your obligations have been affected by the contractual provisions. Another common concern in relation to BIM is that BIM will mean losing your intellectual property rights. The main thing is that there's no particular need on a BIM project for the project team to transfer its intellectual property rights to the client. It should be enough for the project team to simply grant licenses to the client and the other members of the project team to use their models. And that's exactly what CIC protocol does in relation to IPR. And that means that ownership of any model remains with the party producing that model. However, BIM has been used to date, from my experience, as an excuse to transfer intellectual property rights from the project team to the employer. And the key thing is that if the project team assigns its intellectual property rights to the employer, that means that those intellectual property rights can't be used by that member of the project team on any other projects. Whilst that may be a risk that, or it may be something that the member of the project team is prepared to agree to, it's important that you understand the implications of that before doing so, including in relation to, for example, any model objects which you are using on that project, which you have developed with the intention that they would be used on a number of different projects. Another common concern is that BIM will blur the lines of responsibility, such that it won't be clear who has done what to a model or to any structured data. And in this regard, I've included on the slide a quote from PAS 1192 Part 2, which Casey referred to earlier, which essentially sets out the standards regarding the adoption of BIM at level 2. And this makes clear in one of the notes that ownership of information remains with the originator. It might be shared and reused, but only the originator can change it. That is an important point. Obviously, that might not apply if a project isn't being undertaken in accordance with PAS 1192 Part 2. Another key point in relation to having clear lines of responsibility is the use of a BIM execution plan to make clear who is doing what on a project, who is responsible for what. It's also worth considering using the model delivery and production table, or model production and delivery table, which is included in the CIC protocol, to make clear who is doing what on the project and when. In any event, a key point on any BIM project is that records are kept as to what each member of the project team is doing before any information is issued or perhaps uploaded into a common data environment. That means that it will be clear what was issued by each member of the project team at any particular time, so you can go back and see what changes have been made after it was issued. This position may not be the same as we move upwards in terms of how advanced the use of BIM is, and we move towards level 3, which I've included in quotation marks on the slide, because in my view it's not entirely clear exactly what level 3 will be at the moment. But I think when the level of collaboration has increased significantly, and you do have different members of the project team amending the same model, it may not be quite so clear who is responsible for what, and that's when the collaborative forms of contract, which I'm going to discuss later, may become more important. Another common concern in relation to BIM is that it will not be covered by insurance. Helpfully, the CIC Best Practice Guide for PI Insurance, which was published by the BIM Task Group and produced by Griffiths and Armour, was published alongside the CIC protocol, set out that there were no perceived issues in relation to the adoption of level 2 BIM, which would mean that designers wouldn't be covered by professional indemnity insurance. This perhaps goes without saying, but if you do something which is outside the scope of any insurance policy, you won't be covered. So the key point is that even though you might be working on a level 2 project, if you do something on that project which isn't consistent with your cover, you would not be covered by insurance. But that is perhaps common sense. Something that might fall into that category is perhaps an obligation to host data or host a common data environment. that sort of responsibility wouldn't traditionally be covered by professional indemnity insurance. So it's just important that you have discussions with your insurers if you're asked to do something which is unusual and you wouldn't normally be doing on a project, and just confirm where you stand regarding cover. I mentioned previously the position as we move towards level 3, and the insurance position is also perhaps not entirely clear regarding that. Integrated project insurance is being used on some government trial projects at the moment, which has been described as the only insurance product capable of supporting BIM level 3. I should highlight that that was a quote from Steve Banforth at Griffiths and Armour, who have been quite key in promoting integrated project insurance. But the key thing about IPI is that it provides insurance for the project as a whole, not just for the individual members of the project team. And therefore, it's concerned with issues that affect the project as a whole, not just one particular member. Another common concern in relation to BIM, which is perhaps quite topical at the moment, is that there is a need to disclaim liability for any use of your models or any structured data you issue on a BIM project. These disclaimers are being used at the moment, and this is perhaps because members of the project team are unable to verify content of a model or don't feel confident that they can, because a lot of models will contain pre-populated data which can't be removed or might not have been removed before they're issued. Another reason why disclaimers are being included is that the basis of collaboration has not been agreed with the project team at the outset, so it is not clear on what basis you're sharing models and any structured data. For example, there might not be a BIM execution plan on the project, or there might not be CIC protocols attached to the appointments for the project team. In the CIC protocol, the model production and delivery table clearly outlines the base on which models can be used by the members of the project team and liabilities arising from that. So if you don't have those protections and that framework within which to exchange models, it might be understandable that models are being exchanged on the basis that they're for information only, perhaps. Another reason why disclaimers might be being included is that models are not commonly a contractual deliverable, as Casey was commenting. For that reason, I have heard that models are being issued with statements that if there's any conflict between the model and the hard copy 2D documents issued by the project team member, the hard copy documents will take precedence. This means that for those working on BIM projects where disclaimers are being used, it's important that you understand any disclaimers included in models before you use them to develop your own design or take the project forward. For example, if the disclaimer says you must verify it against a 2D drawing, that would mean you would have to go and find a 2D drawing and check for any inconsistencies. Perhaps a more proactive approach would be for careful due diligence to be carried out before models are issued, so that there is less need to disclaim liability. And perhaps one point to bear in mind in relation to that is that there has perhaps been a tendency among some in the industry for models to be produced by technicians and for the design team to be in a separate place of the organisation and not heavily involved in the way in which models are being produced. And the key thing is that these should be clearly aligned. Hopefully, if the basis on which models are shared is agreed at the outset and people in the industry become more confident about exchanging models, disclaimers will become less restrictive going forward. Another common concern is that BIM will give rise to significant software issues, and this essentially arises out of concerns about interoperability, i.e. different software being used to produce information or models speaking different languages. This might mean that model produced by or information produced by one member of the project team appears different when it is accessed by another member of the project team or after it has been converted into a different format, perhaps for clash detection to be carried out or so that a model can be federated. For this reason, the CIC protocol includes an exclusion of liability for data corruption arising after a model is issued by a project team member. I understand from discussions I've had since the CIC protocol was published that this is also something that is being managed by members of the project team at the moment, and that's by agreeing a BIM execution plan under PAS 1192, which clearly sets out how models are being produced, and that's with a view to reducing any risks arising from interoperability issues. In addition, people are verifying models if the format is changed, such they're checking any changes that have been made to them and making sure they are consistent. One perhaps good piece of practice in relation to this is for any conversion of a model to be carried out by the party who has initially produced that model, rather than by a third-party BIM coordinator or information manager, so that that third party doesn't take responsibility for the conversion. Another way in which this is being managed is by the use of new ways of producing models, and by way of reference to industry foundation classes and Open BIM, which mean that when models are produced, they can speak the same language, and so these issues don't arise. These are works in progress at the moment, I understand, but there has been quite a lot of development in both camps. So how is BIM being reflected contractually? BIM at level 2 does not require significant amendments to be made to any contract, provided the roles and responsibilities of the project team are clear and it's clear how they're going to collaborate. So the CIC protocol is perhaps the main industry standard document in the UK at the moment. And just by way of a brief explanation of what the CIC protocol does, is a document that you need to incorporate into your contracts by using an express provision, and the CIC protocol includes suggesting drafting to do that. CIC protocol makes models contractual deliverable so that they must be produced at specific stages. It requires models to be produced to a certain level of detail and permits members of the project team and the employer to use those models for a permitted purpose, which is linked to those levels of detail. The key thing about the CIC protocol is that the appendices, which include a model production and delivery table, which I've discussed previously, and an information requirements which set out the processes which will apply to the production of information on that project. They are very important to how the CIC protocol operates, and it's important that they are carefully agreed by the project team. Another point about the CIC protocol is that it's required to be incorporated into the contracts for all members of the project team, so there is consistency in relation to how information is being exchanged and how BIM is used on the project. So the CIC protocol is not the only way in which BIM is being reflected contractually at the moment. A number of industry bodies have published amendments to their contracts to reflect the use of BIM, but these have perhaps been relatively limited. For example, drafting included in a recent ICC contract simply stated that the contractor was required to comply with any BIM protocol. In addition, the JCT Public Sector Supplement, which was published in 2011, simply suggests that any BIM protocol is included in the employer's requirements or the contract documents. The NEC3 published some slightly more detailed suggestions in relation to BIM, including some compensation events, but these were published in a How to Use BIM with NEC3 Contracts guide, rather than a clear way of incorporating BIM into NEC3 contracts. So therefore, in order to reflect the relevant provisions, you would need to amend the NEC3 contracts to do so. One of the more substantive approaches to reflecting BIM contractually was taken by the CIOB Complex Project Contract, which was published a couple of years ago. And this sets out some clear obligations in relation to BIM of a contractor in Clause 11, including the clause I quoted previously, and also includes at Appendix 3 statement of the obligations of the contractor in relation to the production of models by reference to the uniclass system, and also the level of definition to which models are going to be produced. In addition, the use of BIM is also being reflected in a number of bespoke contracts and protocols at the moment. For example, a bespoke contract may include an obligation to comply with the BIM documents. One of the key pitfalls with such obligations at the moment seems to be that the BIM documents are not always clearly set out, and they may even say that they will be disclosed by the project manager during the course of the project. In terms of bespoke protocols, these are often amended versions of CIC protocol, for example, to state that the employer will own all intellectual property rights in the models. The key thing in relation to any bespoke contracts or protocols or any contractual obligations, including the CIC protocol, is that you ensure that there is consistency between what those contractual obligations are and the way in which BIM is being used on the project, so that anything you agree to reflects what you're actually doing. In addition, it's also important that if you agree to any contractual obligations before you commence work on a project, that you take the contracts out of the drawer and make sure that you are complying with those obligations and that what you're doing is consistent with them. As Casey mentioned, it's also important that you discuss the way in which BIM is going to be used before you enter into any contract on a project, so that you can proceed on the basis that you are clear what your scope is in relation to BIM, what your entitlement to payment is in relation to BIM. So, as I mentioned earlier, as the use of BIM develops further, there's likely to be an increased level of collaboration, which may result in even more collaborative contracts being used. One approach which is currently being taken on some projects in relation to the use of BIM is to set up a joint venture between members of the project team, i.e. between the design team and the contractor, which will then enter into one contract with the employer. The joint venture will then agree in a joint venture agreement how any liability for that under that contract is shared between them. For example, it could be an integrated joint venture which would share liability based on a percentage of any loss suffered. Obviously, it's important that any such joint venture agreement is considered carefully, but that is one potential approach to the increased collaboration. Another form of collaborative contract is a PPC contract. The PPC 2000 was a partnering agreement, and recently the PPC has published a PPC 2015 project alliancing contract, which it states forms a strong basis for BIM levels 2 and 3. A version of the PPC 2000 was used on the government's Cookenwood trial project, and there was a lot of success in doing so. The key points to bear in mind in relation to the PPC contract is that all members of the project team sign up to the same appointment on the same contract, and intellectual property licenses are granted between those members of the project team, so there is essentially one contract. In addition, the PPC envisages a two-stage tendering arrangement whereby a contractor is appointed at an early stage to be involved in the design process and then formally appointed as the project moves forward. If the PPC contracts are used, it's important that you clearly understand how any liability between the partners on the team will be allocated, if there are any risks arising out of the way in which the alliancing or partnering takes place. And also there's clearly set out how BIM will be used on the project by reference to, for example, a BIM execution plan. Another way in which collaborative working can be reflected in a contract is the use of alliancing, which is being used alongside integrated project insurance, I understand. So alliancing operates by essentially having payment linked to a gain share, pain share arrangement, whereby project team members and the employer will suffer pain if the project suffers a loss, but they will make profit and gain if the project is a success. So it clearly links your entitlement to payment to success of the project. As with partnering and the PPC contracts, on an alliancing contract, all of the project team will sign up to the same contract. They will often agree to a no-blame culture, such that if any issues arise, there's no right to sue other members of the alliance. The intention when integrated project insurance is used is that integrated project insurance will step in to resolve any such issues. And the main reason for this approach is that if issues do arise, the project team and the employer, i.e. all members of the alliance, will focus on how best to resolve these issues rather than pointing fingers at who is to blame. So these are some contractual arrangements which we're likely to see adopted increasingly going forward. So to conclude, BIM will change what the project team does. So it will impact on rights and obligations and liability, but the impact can be managed as long as you understand at the outset what you're going to do and you clearly agree the basis of any collaboration, either ideally in a CIC protocol or in some kind of binding BIM execution plan, which the rest of the project team have also agreed to. It's important that on any projects on which BIM is being used, you ensure the contracts reflect the project's approach to BIM. If there are any obligations in a contract regarding BIM, make sure they're consistent with what you're doing on the project, and also make sure that what you're doing on the project regarding BIM is consistent with what the contract says. And finally, as I was just discussing, as BIM progresses and there's increased collaboration, there are likely to be more collaborative contracts being used, which is likely to be a positive thing in terms of increasing collaboration. So that's the end of the talk. Thank you everybody for attending today. If you do have any questions, please do send them through to me or Casey at the contact details which are on the slides, or get in touch with us via Twitter to start some discussions. Before I finish, I should let you know that Beale Company will be hosting another webinar on the 7th of October at 12:30 p.m, which is an update on late payment following a number of recent case law in the Technology and Construction Court in relation to that issue. If you haven't received an invite to that webinar, please let me know and we can issue it to you. It remains for me to say thank you very much for listening to me and Casey this afternoon. As I said, if you have any queries, please do not hesitate to get in touch with us, and thank you for listening.